bucka. Haha. You know the deal.
The next thing we're going to talk about in our number sense unit is called comparing and ordering numbers. And the first thing that we're going to look at here is comparing numbers. And when you're comparing numbers, the question you're really asking yourself is, well, which number is bigger, or which number is smaller? And to explore this, we're going to take a look at a couple of examples. So the first question we're going to look at is which number is bigger or smaller, 37 or 53? Now, by the time you get to grade 6, you probably know the answer to this right away, but we're going to explore how we come up with the answer, or one or two ways with how we come up with that answer. And the first way is we're going to use a number line to help us understand which value is bigger here, 37 or 53. So with this number line, I've chosen to count in tens. So we're counting in 10 ones. And there are values in between those values that I have there. And these two values, 37 and 53, would be two of those values in between the values here. So if I had to sort of figure out where those were on the number line, 37 would be more or less there, a little bit closer to 40, between 30 and 40. And 53, well, that would be about there, a little bit closer to 50, between 50 and 60. So when we're comparing values on a number line, the number furthest to the right is the larger number. And so what that means here is that, well, since 53 is further to the right on the number line, 53 is the bigger number here. Well, since the number that's larger is further to the right, that means a smaller value is further to the left on a number line. So since that's the case, we could also say that therefore 37 is smaller than 53. So with our next example here, we have two numbers again that we're going to compare and try to figure out which one is bigger or smaller. And here we've got 3,158 and 3,975. So again, I'm going to use a number line to try to help understand which one of these values is the bigger or smaller value. And if we want to go ahead and put these on the number line, well, 3,158 is between 3,000 and 4,000 and quite a bit closer to 3,000. 3,975 is almost at 4,000. So again, between 3,000 and 4,000, but very close to 4,000. So once again here we can see, well, 3,975 is further to the right on the number line, so it has to be the bigger value. So that being the case, we can make these two statements here. We can say that 3,975 is bigger than 3,158, or saying the same thing, 3,158 is smaller than 3,975. And that's again because 3,975 is further to the right on the number line, or 3,158 is further to the left on the number line. So let's look at one last example, and again we're going to use a number line initially to help us figure out which one of these values is bigger or smaller, 5,872 or 285. So we'll start with 285, and here I've chosen to count in thousands so that we can include both of these values on our number line. 285 we know is between 0 and 1,000, a little bit closer to 0, so I'd say right about there. And 5,872 is between 5,000 and 6,000, a little bit closer to 6,000, so right about there. And again here, if we're looking at this number line, trying to figure out which one of these values is bigger, well, 5,872 is much, much farther to the right on our number line than 285 is. 285 is much, much further to the left. So that means we can make these two statements here. We can say that 5,872 is bigger than 285 because 5,872 is further to the right on the number line. Or we could say 285 is smaller than 5,872. So we've taken a look at how to use a number line to compare two numbers. What we're going to look at next is the same questions, but we're going to look at a different way to compare these values. So we've already looked at this example here, asking the question which is bigger, 37 or 53, by looking at it on a number line. So if you want to try to compare these numbers without using a number line, without having to draw a number line every time you want to compare two or more numbers, here's another way you can do it. So the first thing you're going to do is look at the biggest place value that we have. So as we talked about in the last video, the bigger place values move further to the left. This can get a little bit confusing because, as we just saw on a number line, the further to the right we get on a number line, the bigger the number is. But with place values, the place value furthest to the left is the biggest place value. So for the first number here, the biggest place value that we have is the tens. And for the second number, the biggest place value that we have is also the tens. So once we look at the biggest place value, then we compare those two numbers. So if the biggest place value is the same for both numbers, which in this case it is here. Once again, the biggest place value we have for 37 is the tens. The biggest place value we have for 53 is the tens. 5 is bigger than 3, or 3 is smaller than 5. So we can compare those values and say that 37 is smaller than 53, or 53 is larger than 37. So if we look at the second example, we'll start by looking at the biggest place value. And the biggest place value we have for 3,975 is the thousands. The biggest place value we have for 3,158 is also the thousands. So the biggest place value is the same. The biggest place value that we have here for both of these numbers is the thousands place. And then we compare those values. Well, if we compare those values, they're the same. Here we have a 3 and here we have a 3. So we have to have another way then to compare these two numbers. We already know which one is bigger and which one is smaller by looking at the number line. But if we want to not use a number line, well, now what we have to do is move to the right in terms of our place values here and compare those digits. So moving to the right here, we can see in our hundreds place, here we have a 9, and in our hundreds place, here we have a 1. Now if those digits happen to be the same, they're not here, but if they happen to be the same, we would continue moving to the right until we got to two digits that were different, that were in the same place value. And we can see that, well, 9 is bigger than 1, so that means 3,975 is bigger than 3,158, or 3,158 is smaller than 3,975. So here's the last example that we looked at. And again, we'll start by looking at the biggest place value. So for 285, the biggest place value we have is the hundreds place. For 5,872, the biggest place value we have is the thousands place. So in this case, the biggest place value is not the same. Now we already know that 5,872 is the larger number here. And it's the larger number because it appears further to the right on the number line, but it's also the larger number because it has the bigger place value. So again, we always start by looking at the biggest place value. If the biggest place value is the same, then we compare those values. And if those values are the same, then we move further to the right. But now, If they're not the same, we can't compare those values. So we have to look at which number has the bigger place value. In this case, 5,872 has a digit other than 0 in the thousands place. So the biggest place value, the value furthest to the left, is the thousands. 285, the biggest place value is the hundreds. Well, thousands are bigger than hundreds, so we would say 5,872 is bigger than 285, or 285 is smaller than 5,872. So from the examples that we've done so far, these are the statements that we've been able to make up to this point. And mathematicians don't like to write words because we all speak different languages around the world, and math is supposed to be a universal language, so we don't want to have English words or statements or phrases in a math sentence. So what we need to do here is we need to translate these statements into a math sentence, and that means that we need to take these English phrases that we have here, bigger than or smaller than, and write them using a mathematical symbol. So fortunately, a mathematical symbol was developed to represent those phrases. And those symbols look something like this. So the symbol that we have here, we would write instead of the phrase is bigger than. And the symbol that we have here, we would write instead of the phrase is smaller than. Now sometimes it's hard to remember which way this is supposed to point. So one way that you can remember, if you're familiar with the game Pac-Man, sometimes you look at this like it's Pac-Man's mouth. So again, we imagine that we've got Pac-Man here. If you're not familiar with Pac-Man, just go ahead and Google the video game Pac-Man, very old video game. But Pac-Man is hungry, and he eats numbers. So since he's hungry and he eats numbers, his mouth is always going to open to the larger number. So if we look at that first example up there, we're saying 53 is bigger than 37. So we're going to use our mathematical symbol for bigger than. So instead of writing the phrase bigger than in a math sentence, we translate that to be this symbol here. Similarly, we're saying 37 is smaller than 53. So we translate that. Instead of writing the phrase is smaller than, we put our mathematical symbol for smaller than. And again, if you think about that like Pac-Man's mouth, Pac-Man is hungry, he eats numbers, and the mouth will always open to the bigger number. And so there I've taken each one of those statements and taken out the English phrase and translated it with the mathematical phrase for smaller than or bigger than. And again, the mouth always opens to the larger number. So we've taken a look at how to compare two numbers, both on a number line and by looking at the place values that are there. So the next thing we're going to look at is ordering numbers. And with ordering numbers, you usually have more than two numbers that you have to compare. And you either have to order them from smallest to biggest or from biggest to smallest. And we're going to start by talking about how to order them from biggest to smallest. So usually you'll have a list of numbers, three or more numbers. You start with the biggest number. So you look at your values and go through the process that we just talked about in terms of trying to find the biggest number. Write it down, and then you want to cross it off of your list. And you continue this process until you have no numbers left. So let's take a look at an example so you understand what I mean by this. So here's an example where we have a list of 6 numbers, and we're asked to write these from the biggest number to the smallest number. So as we saw when we're comparing numbers, we're going to start with the place values here. And our first number has a number in the hundreds. Second number has a number in the thousands place. So we already know the second number is definitely bigger than the first number. The third number, the biggest place value, is our thousands. Next number, our biggest place value, is our hundreds. Next number, our biggest place value, is our 10,000s. And then our last number, well, we only have one digit, so our biggest place value there is our ones. So we're going to start with the biggest number, so we're looking for the biggest place value. Now, luckily, there's only one number that has the absolute biggest place value here, which is the 10,000s. This number here has a digit other than 0 in the 10,000s place, so it has to be our biggest number because it has our biggest place value. So we're going to start with the biggest number, which is that number there. We're going to write that number down. So now that we've written that number down, this is especially important if you have a list of a lot of numbers. You don't want to miss any, and you don't want to write any of them down twice by mistake. So let's cross that one off our list. So now we're looking for our next biggest place value. Well, our next biggest place value that we have is the thousands. And here we have a digit in the thousands place, and here we have a digit in the thousands place. That's the biggest place value that we have left in our list of numbers. So we're really just comparing these two numbers here. The biggest place value that we have there is the thousands. Well, 4 is bigger than 2, so 4,558 is our next biggest number. So it has to come next in our list. And again, since we've got our number, that number on our list, let's cross it off to make sure that we don't forget that we actually did that number. Well, continuing on, the next biggest place value that we still have is our thousands. This number has a 2 in the thousands place. There are no other numbers with anything in the thousands place, so that has to be our next biggest number. So again, now that we've got that on our list, let's cross it off. Know that we've used that number. So now we've only got 3 numbers left. Our biggest place value that we have in any of these numbers now is our hundreds. That first number, we've got a 3 in the hundreds place. And the next number that we have with a digit in the hundreds place is 198, and there's a 1 in the hundreds place there. So we know 324 has to be bigger than 198. So 324 must come next. So once again, since we've got that in our list of numbers from biggest to smallest, we're going to cross it off our original list to know that we used it. Continuing on, still we have a number with a digit in the hundreds place. That's our biggest place value that we have left. So that must be our next biggest number, 198, because no other values that are left here have place values that are bigger or digits that are bigger in that place value. So once again, we can cross it off of our list. Then we only have one number left, and luckily it is our smallest number, so we know that we must have done this right. So our final number here is 8, and we can cross our final number off the list. So here we've taken our original list and wrote the numbers from biggest to smallest, using the place values to help us figure out which one was the biggest first, crossing it off our list, and then figuring out which was the biggest that we had left each time. Well, the next thing we're going to look at is how to order numbers from smallest to biggest instead of biggest to smallest. And the process is very much the same, except instead of starting with the biggest number now, you're going to start with the smallest number. Write that number down and then cross it off your list. And you continue with this process until you have no numbers left. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have a list of numbers, and this time we're being asked to write these numbers from smallest to biggest. So again, instead of starting with the biggest number, now we're going to start with the smallest number. So we're looking at each one of these numbers and asking ourselves, well, which one of these has the smallest place value, furthest to the left? The first number that we have here, the place value furthest to the left is the hundreds. Again, the hundreds. Next number, the biggest place value we have is the hundreds. Here, the biggest place value that we have is tens. And the last one there, the biggest place value that we have, is thousands. So the smallest place value that we have, represented here, furthest to the left, is with 12. It only has a digit in the tens place. Nothing to the left of that. So that has to be our smallest number. So we'll start with 12. And we'll cross it off our list. Well, now the next smallest place value that we have is the hundreds. We know that this last number has a digit in the thousands place, so it can't be our next smallest number. One of these three values has to be. And now we're looking for the smallest of those three numbers. So we're looking for the smallest number that's in the hundreds place, and it's our 1 in the hundreds place. So 135 has to be our next biggest number, because it's the smallest one that we have left on our list. So let's cross that out. Now we're looking for the next smallest. Again, the place values that we have left are the hundreds and the thousands, and the smallest value that we have in the hundreds, which is the smaller of the place values, is 2. So 287 has to be our next biggest number. That's the smallest that we have on this list. And then the last two values that we have here are 458 and 1,582. Well, the hundreds place is smaller than the thousands place. So 458 is our smallest number left on this list. We can go ahead and cross it out. And then we only have one number left, our biggest number, which was 1,582. And it's our biggest number because the thousands place is the biggest place value that we had here. So to finish off our lesson on comparing and ordering numbers, I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of questions here. So in question number 1, you're replacing each blank with those two mathematical symbols. So remember that first symbol means less than, and the second symbol means greater than. For question number 2, write that number list. So just rewrite that number list, but from biggest to smallest. So in other words, starting with the biggest number, working your way down to the smallest number. And finally, number 3, write that number list, but this time from smallest to biggest. So starting with the smallest number that's there, working your way up to the biggest number that's there. If you're able to answer those questions, congratulations. You now have a firm understanding of comparing and ordering numbers.